Jon Snow stood on the battlements of Winterfell, gazing at the horizon as the last traces of twilight faded into a silent, star-pricked sky. The snows had receded somewhat with the coming of spring, but the air still carried that sharp tang of winter's breath. His cloak, thick and black, rustled in a half-hearted breeze. Ghost padded beside him, a living specter whose red eyes darted at any errant sound. It was a night of many secrets and silent contemplations, for Jon had made a choice that would change his life and Westeros forever. The idea of wedding Daenerys Targaryen in Winterfell felt like a dream. He could not quite believe it. Nor could he quiet the swirl of uncertainty inside him. He no longer questioned his parentage as he once had. He knew the truth of his blood, borne out by Samwell Tarly's careful study and Bran Stark's quiet revelations. A part of him still wrestled with the knowledge Rhaegar Targaryen's son, not Ned Stark's bastard. Yet he was also the man who had grown up in Winterfell's courtyard, who had bled and trained and loved among the Starks. In the end, he supposed he was simply Jon. The proud ring of Valyrian steel in Longclaw's hilt and the ghost of Ned Stark's voice in his memory would guide him, no matter what name he carried. Now he stood watch in the quiet hush of the north, on the eve of something he never expected, a double wedding. To Sansa's own surprise and his, she had agreed to marry Tyrion Lannister once again. Many might have called it unthinkable, but after all the conflict and heartbreak, it made a strange, warming sense. Beyond the walls lay a changed kingdom. The Night King had been defeated months ago in a spectacular, harrowing battle that nearly spelled doom for the living. With Daenerys' dragons unleashing fire upon the dead and the combined armies of the North, Dothraki, Unsullied, and remaining knights fighting in unity, Westeros had survived. The victory had not come cheaply, but it had forged bonds few thought possible. Daenerys Targaryen emerged still as the mother of dragons, though she had only two, Drogon and Rhaegal. She had lost Viserion beyond the wall, a wound she still carried in her eyes whenever she looked at the sky. People whispered that maybe her unstoppable drive to claim the Iron Throne had softened. She saw the realm as something more than a conquest now. She understood how desperately Westeros needed healing, and her meeting with Jon Snow had changed her perspective on both war and love. Jon had not knelt easily, and Daenerys had not opened her heart lightly. Their bond had begun as a fragile alliance, the king in the north seeking help against the undead and the Dragon Queen wanting him to bend the knee. The swirl of fates drew them closer until loyalty and admiration blossomed into something more. By the time the long night ended, many around them already guessed what was happening. Their dynamic was not all smooth nor absent of disagreement, but something real had taken root between them, something that transcended words like alliance or betrothal. Their union, now sanctioned by necessity and recognized by Northerners who had seen her fight to protect them, would unite houses that had long been opposed, forging a future that still felt precarious as an icy ledge. Meanwhile, Sansa Stark had watched everything from her place in Winterfell. She had grown from a naive girl who wanted little more than fancy dresses and courtly praise to a woman forged by tragedy and tested by power. She was more commanding now, more resolute, her delicate beauty sharpened by an unyielding will. She had learned the intricacies of cunning from Littlefinger, but she chose to use that knowledge to protect her family and her home. Through the darkest hours, she had discovered her own strengths, and in Tyrion Lannister, she found perhaps the only man in the Seven Kingdoms who understood, in his own quiet way, the weight of being underestimated. They had married once at Joffrey's command, a union meant to humiliate them both. Yet they had come through it with something resembling respect. It had been an odd, timid partnership that had never had the chance to flourish, overshadowed by the cruelty of the Lannisters and the monstrous environment of King's Landing under Joffrey's reign. Their marriage had ended in confusion and flight, and they had each gone on to endure hardships that changed them. And so it felt like fate or the gods' odd sense of humor, that after all the turmoil they were finding their way back. A second marriage, this time done by choice, gave them the opportunity to test an unspoken bond. Nobody expected a passionate romance, but something deeper, a union of intelligence, trust, and gentle sympathy. Tyrion was not the same man who had once hidden behind quips and wine. Sansa was not the same girl who wanted songs and fair-haired knights. And so they looked at each other across the feasting tables, across the ramparts, and realized that some improbable affection had grown between them. Soon, the two weddings would be celebrated together in Winterfell's Great Hall, forging new paths for House Stark and House Targaryen, even entangling the last of House Lannister in a northern knot. The realm watched, suspecting that these vows would shape a new future. If Daenerys truly intended to rule from King's Landing, or from some seat that recognized the North's freedom, no one could say for sure. If Sansa would remain Lady of Winterfell, or become the Lady of Casterly Rock, that too was unknown. Everything stood on the cusp of change. Jon lingered on the battlements a while longer, breathing in the cold hush, letting the old stones of Winterfell remind him who he was at heart. He walked the rampart until he spotted a torchlit figure below. The swirl of pale hair told him in an instant who it was. Daenerys had come outside, away from the warmth of the hearth and the gossip of the lords, to search for him. He made his way down the stone steps, Ghost following at his heel. When he reached her, Daenerys smiled, her face lit in the glow of the torch. She wore a thick cloak of wolf fur that Sansa had insisted on giving her, and it dwarfed her slender frame. Jon took the torch from her hands and held it so he could see her face more clearly. She looked exhausted but determined. "Can't sleep either?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "It's strange to think of a wedding taking place here, in the very hall where I feasted with the men and women who once looked at me as an invader. Tonight I tried to rest, but I found my mind drifting back to all this. I thought perhaps you'd be at the Godwood, but I see you prefer the battlements these days." He bent to scratch Ghost behind the ears. "The Godwood is Sansa's domain, I think. She finds more comfort among those old weirwood trees than I ever did." He paused, glancing up at her. "And you? You never told me whether you prefer the old gods or the new." Daenerys tilted her head, contemplating. "I prayed to the gods of my ancestors in a way when I was in Essos, but it feels like a lifetime ago. Here, all that matters is that the gods, whoever they are, know our hearts. My heart is uncertain tonight, but certain of what I want. If that makes sense." Jon carefully set the torch against the base of the castle wall. The glow outlined the angles of Daenerys's face in warm, flickering light. He took her hand gently and looked at the small ring that rested on her finger, the one he had given her, set with a single shard of dragon glass polished into a pale, smooth gem. "I'm sorry the wedding can't be more southern for you," he said with a small smile. "I know we northerners have strange customs and chilly halls, but I promise you'll have as many well wishes as we can spare." Daenerys leaned against him, closing her eyes for a moment. "I don't need pageantry or expensive silks. I need unity. The day we stand before the people and exchange vows in front of them. I want them to see me not as an outsider, but as someone who loves the North and all of Westeros. Maybe that's naive, but I'm willing to try." He wrapped an arm around her. For a few quiet breaths, they stood together in the cold courtyard, neither speaking. Ghost circled once and lay at their feet, watchful. Above them, a crescent moon guided the stars across the deep blue tapestry of the sky. Jon felt the wild flutter inside his chest whenever he looked upon Daenerys. He had not planned on love, but as with so many unexpected events in his life, this too was destined. He could only hope it would not bring tragedy in its wake. At length, Jon inclined his head toward the entrance. "Come inside. I won't have you freezing out here the night before our wedding." A tiny wry grin bent his mouth at the phrase, "our wedding." He still wasn't used to it. Daenerys answered with a soft laugh. "Agreed. Let's try to find some rest." They returned to the torchlit corridors of Winterfell, passing guards who inclined their heads. The keep was quieter than usual, but a busy hush thrummed in the walls, servants and cooks preparing for the morrow, knights checking swords, ladies ensuring gowns were ready. There was a sense of excitement, a stirring of celebration that Winterfell had not truly felt since before the war. They said goodnight in the corridor, giving each other a final, meaningful look before retreating to separate chambers. Only Ghost padded away with Jon, a silent sentinel in the shadows. Elsewhere in the castle, Tyrion Lannister stood in a small chamber that overlooked the courtyard, swirling a cup of mulled wine, his mind drifting across 1,000 half-formed thoughts. He set the cup down and looked into the fading embers of a brazier. The marriage that awaited him in the morning weighed heavily upon his mind, yet not with dread. He remembered the day he first wed Sansa Stark. He had been in King's Landing, forced by his father's machinations to wed a girl who despised him through no real fault of her own. He recalled the pity and shame he felt as she trembled in her wedding dress, terrified by the fate that had been thrust upon her. Now, here in Winterfell, things were different. Sansa was no longer a frightened girl, and he was no longer the powerless Lannister scorned by his own family. The defeat of the White Walkers had changed the world in ways no one expected. He had found a new sense of purpose advising Daenerys, and if they truly forged a just realm, perhaps a man like him could serve openly, respected for his mind rather than scorned for his stature. But Sansa. She was Lady of Winterfell, and the entire North, once suspicious of the Lannisters, now recognized Tyrion's role in helping defeat Cersei's tyranny. He had smuggled out vital information, had allied with Daenerys, and had done what he could to mitigate bloodshed. Not all hearts were won, but his conduct had earned at least a measure of begrudging respect. He and Sansa had also shared quiet conversations in the last few months. It began tentatively with shared memories of the heartbreak they both endured. Slowly, it grew into something more akin to kinship and trust. With a deep breath, Tyrion downed the last of his wine and set the cup aside. On the small table nearby, a single object gleamed in the candlelight, a golden pin shaped like a hand. His old symbol of office as the hand of the queen. He couldn't help but smile ruefully. The realm had never been so uncertain, and yet here they were, forging new alliances through the oldest tradition of all, marriage. Taking the pin, he turned it over in his hands. "I can only hope this time it brings less chaos," he murmured to himself. He left his chamber, hoping a late stroll might ease his restless mind. The corridors were hushed, tapestries swaying gently with the draft. As he neared the library, he caught sight of someone walking alone, a figure with auburn hair shimmering in the torchlight. He knew instantly it was Sansa. She stood by a window, cloak drawn tight around her shoulders, her gaze somewhere far beyond the walls. Tyrion approached quietly, not wishing to startle her, but she sensed him nonetheless and turned. Her expression was neither startled nor cold, but calm, laced with a trace of a smile. "Couldn't sleep either, Lord Tyrion?" she asked, the soft curve of her lips making him recall the naive girl she once was. But behind the gentle tone was a formidable mind, he could see it in her eyes. He bowed his head slightly. "It seems the forthcoming festivities weigh heavily on us both, Lady Sansa. Perhaps we can take solace that neither of us is alone in our insomnia." She exhaled a breath that might have been a laugh. "I don't suppose so. So much is about to change. I just needed a moment to think about it." She turned back to the window where the moonlight cast pale beams across her face. Tyrion stepped beside her, looking out over the courtyard. From this vantage, they could see the old well, the scattered stones, the torches still burning near the entry gates. "We've both grown older since our last wedding day," he remarked, voice low with reflection. She gave a slight nod. "In many ways, we're different people. Or at least I hope so." He chuckled under his breath. "No argument from me. That's something to be grateful for." They stood in companionable silence for a few heartbeats, each lost in the swirl of memory. Finally, Tyrion spoke again, his voice quiet. "Sansa, I want you to know, tomorrow it's not an obligation to me. I'm not your captor. I hold no illusions that you must do this. If you need more time, if you're uncertain, say the word." Sansa turned to him, her eyes shimmering in the dim glow. "We've both lost so much. I've lost my childhood dreams, my illusions, my family in many ways. But I also found something stronger. This wedding, our wedding, it's not about the past tyranny in King's Landing. You were kinder to me than anyone else there, even if it was a small kindness at the time. Now, I see. I see a man who has used his intelligence and wit to try to help Daenerys bring peace. You're not without flaws, I know that. But neither am I. As strange as this union might appear to some, I believe we can do real good together." Her words, firm yet gentle, filled Tyrion with an emotion he scarcely recognized. He bowed his head, grateful. "You honor me, Lady Sansa. Tomorrow I will do my best to be worthy of that trust." She brushed her hands over the folds of her cloak. "Tomorrow," she echoed softly. Then, after a moment, she stepped forward, leaning in to press a small, tentative kiss to his cheek. Her lips barely brushed his skin before she pulled away, her cheeks slightly colored. She gave him a faint, shy smile. "For luck," she said, before turning away. "Good night, Tyrion." He watched her go, feeling his own cheeks warm and realizing that a faint tremor of something close to hope had taken seed in his chest. When she disappeared around a corner, he looked once more out the window, whispered a quiet thought to whichever gods might listen, and headed back to his chamber. Morning arrived with a hush of fresh snow. The sky was gray and heavy, dropping large flakes that fell gently upon the ramparts and the courtyard, blanketing every rooftop. It seemed winter was reluctant to yield, even though the season should have begun to soften by now. Still, the Northerners were used to such small rebellions of nature. The great hall of Winterfell was alive with frantic preparation. Servants rushed to lay out long, heavy wooden tables. The hearth blazed in a triumphant fire, scattering shadows against the high stone walls. Garlands of evergreen and hardy winter flowers, no easy feat to gather, adorned the pillars. House banners draped overhead, the Stark direwolf and Targaryen dragon side by side, with a Lannister lion discreetly placed near the dais, a subtle sign of Tyrion's station. The mood was as bright as the north allowed. Many of the newly arrived lords, knights, and dignitaries roamed the courtyard, stamping their boots in the snow and greeting each other with a mixture of curiosity and guarded courtesy. Arya Stark slipped through the bustle like a silent shade, making her way toward the hall to stand near the dais where her sister would stand soon. She wore simple leathers over a warm tunic, though a fine cloak of gray fur was draped on her shoulders in deference to the occasion. She scanned the hall, her sharp gray eyes picking out the faces of men who had come to witness the wedding. She saw northern lords, free folk representatives who had stayed after the Great War, and emissaries sent by the Vale and even Dorne. Not all were allies, but a wedding in the north featuring the Dragon Queen and the Lady of Winterfell was too significant to miss. Bran Stark was already in the hall, seated in a place of honor, watching without expression. One might think him uninterested, but Arya knew better. She knew how her brother, changed into the three-eyed raven, sat quietly, seeing truths beyond the veil of time. He wore a thick cloak lined with wolf fur, and around his neck, a small weirwood carving hung, an odd reminder of his deeper connection to the old gods. The north held its collective breath for a moment when Daenerys arrived, accompanied by Missandei and a few trusted ladies from the north who now served as her attendants. She wore a gown of deep, muted silver, with subtle patterns of dragons embroidered along the sleeves. Her silver-gold hair was twisted into braids reminiscent of old Valyrian tradition, though a single northern clasp shaped like a direwolf pinned a portion of her braid. It was a quiet but powerful signal of unity. As she moved through the hall, she carried herself like a queen, dignified, head held high, but with gentleness in her eyes for those who looked upon her. The hush that fell was not out of fear, as it might once have been, but a curious respect. Moments later, Jon Snow entered with Theon Greyjoy at his side, the two men exchanging a quiet word. Jon was dressed in dark fabrics with subtle hints of red in the stitching, acknowledging his Targaryen blood, though he still wore a wolf's head clasp on his cloak. He moved with a stiffness that suggested he was not entirely comfortable under so many watchful eyes, but there was no denying the aura of leadership he carried, shaped by battles and betrayal and an unwavering sense of duty. Tyrion watched from the side, heart pounding. He wore a black doublet with gold filigree paired with a heavier cloak for the north's climate. Though he was dwarfed literally by the crowd, his presence was hardly overshadowed. People shifted respectfully to grant him passage, a sign that the realm had changed indeed. He swallowed once, scanning the throngs, waiting for the moment Sansa Stark would enter. He spotted the Hound among the crowd, standing quietly with arms folded, looking on with a blank scowl. The hush deepened. Then Sansa appeared. She wore a gown of ivory and pale gray, trimmed in silver thread that caught the firelight. The shape of it evoked the classic lines of northern fashion, high-collared, fur-laced, with subtle leaf-like designs reminiscent of the weirwood. Her hair was parted in the front, the rest woven into a thick braid that cascaded over her shoulder, an elegant style that suited her regal bearing. The soft hush that fell across the great hall was almost reverent. She had always been a beauty, but it was the strength radiating from her that turned heads. She paused at the entrance for a heartbeat, letting her gaze pass across the assembled, and then her eyes settled on Tyrion. He stepped forward, heart hammering, and each slow footstep on the stone floor echoed in the silent hall. Sansa's lips curved in a gentle, determined smile. "SH." He approached, meeting him halfway. Arya and Missandei exchanged glances from the dais, each registering the moment with their own quiet acceptance. Jon and Daenerys, standing a short distance off, also locked eyes. A few scurrying servants made last-minute adjustments, hurrying out of the way. Two septons, one for the faith of the Seven, one for the old gods, in a compromise hammered out by the families, stood ready to perform the ceremony. The hall was as full as it had ever been, perhaps since the time of Ned Stark. Laughter, conversation, and the soft clink of cups had died into a breathless expectancy. Then, as if from nowhere, music began. A subtle tune played on a northern flute, joined by a southern lute, weaving a melody that was at once solemn and hopeful. The wedding was about to begin. Standing there with Daenerys at his side, Jon felt a sudden, overpowering swirl of emotion. He saw Ghost slip in near the corner, watchful eyes scanning the crowd. He saw his family, Arya, stern and protective, Bran, distant but present, Sansa, radiant in her pale gown. He saw Daenerys beside him, the Silver Queen with dragonfire in her veins. The memory of everything they had been through, Castle Black, Har Home, the dragon's arrival, the crypts of Winterfell, the battle against the dead collided in his mind all at once. A lump caught in his throat. He bowed his head slightly as the Septon began to speak. The ceremony was a carefully choreographed dance of tradition. First, the old gods were honored. Jon took Daenerys' hand and led her before a small weirwood branch that had been cut and brought into the hall, a piece of the heart tree. The branch bore carved eyes in the same style that had marked the face in the god's wood outside. The northern lords looked on, some in approval, a few in silent skepticism, but no one protested. Jon and Daenerys each spoke simple vows. Their voices trembled only slightly and the hush was profound. Daenerys' vow spoke of protecting the North, of sharing its burdens, of forging a future free from tyranny. Jon's vow promised loyalty, partnership, and love in that slow, measured way he had. Then they exchanged tokens, Daenerys offering Jon a small pendant shaped like a dragon fang and Jon gently placing a ring with a wolf's head on her finger. As they clasped hands, the soft hush of the watchers broke into murmurs of acknowledgement. Even from the furthest corners, eyes gleamed with hints of tears or quiet well-wishes. Then it was Tyrion and Sansa's turn. This time, the Septon of the Faith of the Seven stepped forward. He spoke in the measured tones of ceremony, though less formal than what might have occurred in King's Landing. Sansa and Tyrion faced each other, and for a moment, a ghost of old memories flickered in their expressions, the terrified girl and the reluctant groom. But the memory was overshadowed by the reality of who they were now. Tyrion spoke his vow first, voice soft but firm. He pledged to Sansa his mind, his counsel, his loyalty. He pledged to stand beside her in times of winter and times of summer. Sansa responded, her voice steady, offering him her acceptance and her dedication to forging a better world. When she slipped a ring onto Tyrion's finger, a band of silver carved with the direwolf's head, there was a collective intake of breath in the hall. The Lannister lion and the Stark wolf joined willingly. It was nothing short of historic. The ceremony concluded as the Septons pronounced the unions. A cheer erupted, echoing off the walls. A fresh flurry of snow whirled outside as though the gods themselves blessed the moment. Jon and Daenerys leaned into a quiet, trembling kiss. Tyrion and Sansa shared a soft, delicate one. The great hall roared with approval, northerners stamping their feet, Dothraki letting out exuberant cries in their language, knights from the Reach clapping politely, free folk whistling and hollering. In that moment, it felt like old hatreds could be set aside, if only for a day. Then came the feasting. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, thick stews, fresh-baked breads, and hearty winter vegetables. Ale, mead, and wine flowed freely. The North was never as ostentatious in celebration as the Southern courts, but they made up for it with warmth and generosity. The mead hall was alive with merriment. Music spilled forth in lively tunes, prompting dancing in the open spaces. Jon found himself whisked from conversation to conversation, receiving well-wishes from northern lords, from Knights of the Vale, from the smattering of Riverland's lords who had come. Daenerys was similarly surrounded, though she moved gracefully, greeting lords with a regal poise. People marveled to see her like this, not the fierce conqueror astride a dragon, but a woman of compassion, smiling as she received small gifts from the families. Missandei stayed close by, quietly helping with introductions whenever necessary. Tyrion and Sansa sat at the high table, side by side. She had once loathed the public eye, but she handled it now with composed elegance. Tyrion, too, found his sense of humor returning, offering wry remarks that made Sansa smile in amusement. They looked, if not traditionally romantic, then at least comfortable in each other's presence. Now and then they exchanged a glance laden with a warmth that belied any cynicism. Arya moved around the hall, feigning boredom but staying near enough to Sansa to let her sister know she was there. Bran occasionally offered small smiles to well-wishers, but mostly kept to himself, his gaze distant as if he were half aware of events beyond the moment. Outside, the snow fell. Inside, the fire blazed and the hours rolled by in a haze of drinking, dancing, and laughter. At some point, Daenerys found herself standing with Jon near one of the large hearths. He had just finished a quick word with Ser Davos and Tormund, who were both in good spirits. Tormund especially, gulping ale and telling outrageous stories about the far north. Daenerys laughed at one of Tormund's jokes, though she couldn't entirely follow its meaning. She felt the warmth of the fire on her face, or perhaps the warmth was from the wine she had tasted. Her eyes lingered on Jon. Something about him in the simple black doublet made her heart flutter. He was no longer just the brooding, reluctant king in the north. He was her husband. A strange, stirring thought. Jon, for his part, looked at Daenerys as though seeing her anew. A swirl of color from the dancers cast flickering reflections across her silver hair, making it seem ablaze. He recalled how they had once argued in Dragonstone, locked in a battle of words and stubborn pride. Now he could not imagine facing the future without her. They drew close, foreheads almost touching, as the merriment continued around them. For a brief moment, the world fell away, leaving only the heat of the hearth and the quiet hush of their intertwined breath. They might have kissed again had Grey Worm not appeared discreetly, clearing his throat to respectfully announce that Lady Sansa and Lord Tyrion were calling for a toast at the high table. Smiling, Daenerys and Jon stepped away, passing through the crowd as lords and ladies turned to watch. At the high table, Tyrion was already on his feet, a goblet in hand, while Sansa stood by him with an amused tilt to her lips. "Friends, allies, and all good folk of Westeros," Tyrion called in a sonorous voice, surprising many with the strength of it. "We thank you for joining us on this day of union. We have fought together, bled together, and now we feast together. May these marriages stand as proof that we can overcome old enmities and find a better path forward. To King Jon and Queen Daenerys, may their bond keep the realm from falling into chaos. And, of course, to Lady Sansa and, well, I suppose now Lord Consort Tyrion." He paused to let a ripple of laughter pass. "May our union prove that even in this world of ice and fire, we can find respect and with it, perhaps even love." Sansa tilted her goblet in salute. "Hear, hear," she echoed softly, her voice carrying an unexpected clarity through the hall. The crowd raised their cups in a thunderous toast. Jon nodded his thanks, Daenerys offered a small, regal smile, and then the hall erupted in cheers, laughter, and the scraping of chairs as everyone took another hearty drink. The day wore on into evening, and as darkness settled outside, the glow of countless candles and the roaring hearths made Winterfell's great hall feel almost ethereal. Joyful toasts, gentle teasing, and heartfelt speeches abounded. Arya was coaxed into a toast of her own, which was short and to the point. "My sister is strong. I suspect my new brother-in-law knows that well by now. As for Jon and Daenerys, they've been through hell. I hope they find a bit of peace. The rest of us will keep swords sharp, just in case." That drew cheers and scattered applause. At some point in the evening, Davos, with a wry grin, tried to teach Daenerys a northern drinking song, though the results were more comical than harmonic. She gamely tried to follow along, laughing at her own mispronunciations of the dialect. Jon looked on with a trace of a grin, cherishing the side of her he rarely saw, relaxed, carefree, shining with warmth. Meanwhile, Brienne of Tarth stood watch nearby, occasionally exchanging stiff nods with Podrick, who looked a bit overwhelmed by the scale of the festivities. As the night deepened, the dancing began. Northern reels mixed with the more exotic rhythms brought by the Queen's retinue. Even the Dothraki joined in, demonstrating steps that startled and delighted the northern watchers. The hall became a swirl of color and motion, the music pounding in the chest. Jon, hesitant at first, allowed Daenerys to lead him into a simple dance. They moved quietly, eyes on each other, all too aware of the curious stares from the crowd. But soon, they forgot the watchers and simply followed the music's pull. Tyrion managed to guide Sansa through a stately waltz, the difference in their heights making it slightly awkward, but they carried on gracefully enough. Now and then Sansa would lean down to hear Tyrion's whispered jest, and a small laugh escaped her lips. It felt surreal, her dancing with him in the heart of Winterfell, the seat of House Stark. And yet she could not deny the odd contentment creeping over her. She had never believed, after all her torments, that she could feel safe again in another's presence, let alone the man who'd once been forced upon her. But life had a strange way of evolving, especially in a realm as tumultuous as theirs. Eventually, as the moon rose high, the couples withdrew. A hush of expectancy settled as tradition demanded that the newlyweds retire to their chambers. In southern courts, the bedding ceremony was often a raucous, vulgar affair, but Sansa had firmly refused any such humiliations. Daenerys supported her in that, as did Jon. So the hall parted respectfully, forming two pathways, one for Jon and Daenerys, one for Tyrion and Sansa. They each retreated amid scattered applause and good-natured cheers. Left behind, the revelers turned back to their feasting and dancing, toasting absent newlyweds and indulging in gossip as is customary in any royal or noble celebration. The night stretched on, thick with warmth and the tang of spiced wine. Jon and Daenerys' chamber was lit with a low, comforting glow of firelight. The walls were adorned with wolf iconography and subtle Targaryen touches. It was a smaller room than the massive bedchambers in King's Landing or Dragonstone, but it was cozy. Once inside, they found themselves alone. Ghost had been posted outside, perhaps awaiting Jon's call. The crackle of the hearth was the only sound at first. Daenerys slowly removed her cloak. letting it slide from her shoulders, and she turned to Jon with a faint smile, her eyes reflecting both nerves and tenderness. Jon stepped forward, brushing a strand of silver hair from her cheek, his touch light as a snowflake. Words felt unnecessary as they leaned into a soft, lingering kiss. Their wedding day had been a swirl of ceremony and expectation, but here, they were simply two souls seeking each other's warmth against the vast northern cold. In a different wing of the castle, Sansa escorted Tyrion into a chamber prepared for them. It was tastefully arranged with fresh rushes on the floor, heavy furs on the bed, and candles casting dancing shadows on the walls. She felt a trickle of nervousness, recalling the last time she had been forced to share a bedchamber under circumstances not of her choosing. But Tyrion paused a respectful distance away, his eyes cast down. He did not wish to intrude upon her space or her comfort. "Sansa," he began softly, "I know well we stand upon an unsteady foundation. If you prefer, I can find another chamber." She studied him in the wavering light, recalling the day he refused to claim his husbandly rights in King's Landing. He had given her dignity when no one else did. Now he gave her space again. She drew in a breath, grateful for it. "We are married," she said, voice more assured than she felt. "We should at least speak a while. I've grown tired of living in fear, and I think it's time we learn how to trust each other." His eyes rose to meet hers, warm with understanding. "I would like that very much," he said simply. She led him further into the room, gesturing for him to sit in a chair by the hearth while she took the one opposite. Between them stood a small table on which a decanter of wine rested beside 2 cups. She poured for them both, the aromatic scent of spiced red wine filling the air. They sipped, letting the quiet envelop them. After a moment, she asked him about his life since they had parted, genuinely curious. How he had traveled to Essos, how he'd come to be in Daenerys' service, how he'd made his way back to Westeros. He answered plainly, though sparing her certain darker details. She, in turn, recounted her path from King's Landing to the Eyrie, the horrors of Ramsay Bolton, and ultimately, her reclamation of Winterfell. Tyrion's fists clenched at the mention of Ramsay, and Sansa saw a flash of sorrow in his eyes. She realized that, in his own way, he felt guilt for not having been able to protect her sooner. Yet she told him it was not his burden to bear. They had each been pawns in larger games once, but those times were gone. Hours slipped by as they talked in hushed voices. Gradually, the tension in the room eased, replaced by an odd, gentle warmth. Sansa felt the weight of her gown and the day's events bearing down on her, exhaustion creeping into her bones. Tyrion noticed her drooping eyelids. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I've kept you awake, talking so much." She shook her head. "I've never heard you apologize for talking," she teased softly. Then her eyes drifted toward the bed. She felt a flicker of worry, but also acceptance. "I'll take the bed," she said, voice calm. "But I don't mean to dismiss you to the floor like a servant." He shrugged lightly, a trace of self-deprecating humor crossing his face. "I've slept in worse conditions, but we are husband and wife. If you are comfortable, I can sleep on one side. I promise you, I'll remain a gentleman. Unless you think it better if I find a different chamber?" She studied him for a moment, thinking of the miles between who she was and who she had become. She whispered, "Stay. A part of me wants to believe that a new life is possible. Let's not begin it apart." Careful not to break the fragile peace, Tyrion nodded. They prepared for rest. Sansa slid off her gown behind a modest partition, changed into a warm linen shift. Tyrion removed his outer layers, left in a simple tunic and breeches. He placed a small pillow and blanket on one half of the bed, ensuring she had ample space. They lay down, each facing outward at first, uncertain. But after a time, Sansa turned slightly, her eyes finding his in the dim candlelight. He offered her a gentle smile, and she let the curve of her lips return it. Sleep came softly, as if the gods themselves bestowed a moment of peace after so many years of storm. All across Winterfell, in separate chambers, corridors, and corners, The revelry continued well into the night. Some dozed off in corners, too full of mead to find their beds. Others sang, laughed, and shared old war stories. Snow drifted lazily outside, blanketing the courtyard, tucking the castle in a pristine hush. The grand double wedding had ushered in a fleeting sense of unity and optimism, at least within these old gray walls. Yet beyond Winterfell's gates, the realm was never at rest. The Iron Islands still harbored lords with their own ambitions. The remnants of the Lannister power in the Westerlands churned with uncertainty. And in King's Landing, the seat of power awaited a ruler capable of piecing together a fractured kingdom. But for this one night, these four individuals, Jon Snow, Daenerys Targaryen, Sansa Stark, and Tyrion Lannister, found themselves bound by solemn vows. Whether it was enough to keep the wolves, lions, and dragons at bay in the future remained to be seen. But hope, like the faint promise of spring in the north, had taken root. Outside, the snow fell, the moon drifted behind the clouds, and the great hall's fires burned down to embers. And so ended the day of the double wedding at Winterfell, an event that might go down in the chronicles of Westeros as the start of a new era or the prelude to conflicts yet to unfold. For now, though, within the snug stone walls, the brides and grooms slept, and Winterfell dreamed with them, resting in rare tranquility beneath the silent, star-dappled sky. Jon Snow awoke to a soft light filtering through the shutters of the small window. For a moment, he did not recall where he was. Then the warmth of another presence brought everything into focus, the faint sound of Daenerys's breathing, the gentle weight of her head resting against his chest. Her silver hair spilled across the furs in a shining tumble. The events of the previous day rushed back to him, the double wedding in Winterfell, the feasting, the dancing, the vows exchanged. He let out a slow breath. There had been so many times in his life when waking was a jolt of reality, a return to duty and hardship. This was different. For a few precious heartbeats, he allowed himself to luxuriate in the quiet, letting the mild scent of her hair and the steady rise and fall of her breath lull him. Then he felt the familiar pang of obligation. Even on a day such as this, there was much to do. The realm did not sleep merely because Jon Snow had wed Daenerys Targaryen. Word would spread quickly of this union, perhaps it already had. Loyalists from all corners of Westeros would soon react. Some might support the alliance wholeheartedly, seeing in it a chance for long-needed peace. Others might see only opportunity or threat. Jon thought of the lords in the north, some of whom still felt uneasy about the presence of dragons. He remembered how they used to grumble that he was only half a Stark, that he was not truly Ned's son in their eyes. Now the truth of his Targaryen blood had come out, though only among a select few confidants. He wondered if the entire realm would discover it soon. He suspected yes. With a soft sigh, he shifted slightly, drawing Daenerys closer. She stirred, eyelids fluttering. For a moment she looked at him as if trying to place him, then a gentle smile touched her face. "Good morning, my king," she said softly. He felt a faint flush warm his cheeks. "Good morning, my queen," he replied, just as softly. He never quite knew how to address her in private, for the formality of titles felt strange when she was simply Daenerys to him. But she did not protest. They lay there for a while, listening to the muted sounds drifting through the thick walls. Already, people were stirring in the corridors, footsteps echoing as servants carried wood for the hearths, or the scraping of a broom on stone. Daenerys turned onto her back, gazing at the low ceiling. "I still can't believe we're married," she murmured half to herself. "I spent so many years across the narrow sea, thinking only of how to claim the throne, how to gather armies and ships. I never once imagined I would come here, to Winterfell, to wed a man from the north. Someone who has shown me what I truly fight for." He brushed a thumb across her hand. "What do you fight for now?" She smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "For the living, for people who deserve freedom from cruelty, for a future that isn't bound by the wheel of lords and usurpers stepping on the small folk. I suppose I always claimed that was what I wanted, but I didn't fully understand it until the war against the dead forced us all to unite. The cost was terrible, but it opened my eyes." Jon's gaze fell to where her hand rested gently on his chest. "We've both lost so many. Friends, loved ones, even your dragon, Viserion. Yet somehow we have this chance." He paused, swallowing hard. "I don't want to waste it." She turned her head, a small flicker of worry crossing her face. "Nor do I. But I also know that everything we do now must be for the good of the realm. Our marriage might bring peace, or it might provoke new resentments. We have to tread carefully." Jon nodded. "That we do." He let out a breath, shifting to sit up. "I should speak with Sansa and Tyrion. It's likely they have their own plans for how to navigate the aftermath of these vows. After all, a double wedding with Lannister and Stark cannot go unremarked." Daenerys's lips curved. "Let's see how they fared on their wedding night first. I have a feeling Sansa will insist on an early start to the day. She's always been the most proper of your siblings, has she not?" Jon smiled, remembering the bright-haired girl who once dreamed of being a queen, enthralled by the glamour of King's Landing. Now Sansa had matured into a poised lady of Winterfell, but with a spine of steel no one could ignore. "She's changed," he said softly. "We all have." Daenerys reached for her robe, wrapping it around her shoulders, and rose from the bed with quiet grace. Jon stood as well, rummaging for the clothes he'd worn the night before. A thick, dark tunic and trousers to stave off the chill. As they dressed, they caught each other's eye in the dim light and exchanged soft smiles, still abashed at the novelty of sharing a chamber in Winterfell. Finally, Jon opened the door to find Ghost lying right outside, tail flicking. The dire wolf regarded them, rising silently to pad alongside Jon. A few corridors away, Tyrion Lannister woke with a dull headache pounding at his temples. He blinked, disoriented by the unfamiliar bed, the thicker northern furs, and the chill that clung to the stones. Then he noticed Sansa Stark stirring beside him. She was turned away, hair tumbling across the pillow, the pale morning light touching the curve of her shoulder where her shift had slipped slightly. The memory of the previous night drifted back in fragments, long conversations by the fireside, the gentle hush before they lay down, each guarded yet open to the possibility of trust. He recalled how eventually sleep claimed them in a fragile peace. He sat up, pressing the heels of his hands against his forehead. Far too much wine, he thought wryly. Though it was a wedding feast, so that was hardly surprising. For a moment he debated whether to rise quietly or remain until she awoke. Before he could decide, Sansa turned, blinking her blue eyes at him, her expression unreadable in the haze of morning. He cleared his throat, searching for something polite to say. "Good morning," he ventured quietly. "I apologize in advance if I snore. I'm told I do on occasion." Sansa regarded him a moment, then a corner of her mouth twitched in the faintest of smiles. "I've heard far worse sounds in my life," she said lightly. "But you're not exactly quiet, Lord Tyrion." He chuckled softly, relieved she didn't seem ill at ease. "I've never been accused of quietness," he said. He took stock of the surroundings, a simple but comfortable chamber, a small table still bearing the remnants of last night's wine decanter, the faint coals in the hearth. "Thank you," he said more softly, "for trusting me enough to share this space." She folded her hands in her lap, looking at him with a seriousness that reminded him of Catelyn Stark. "I remember the day we wed in King's Landing. You were forced to it, as was I. Nothing about that day felt right or natural. Today feels different. I suppose I should be grateful we can make our own choices now, but it's still not simple, is it?" Tyrion shook his head. "No, it's not. We have the entire North to consider, and more than that, the entire realm. Our marriage stands as a symbol of alliance, perhaps even of reconciliation. But the reality is that many Northerners still despise the Lannister name. And I suspect there are those in the Westerlands who wonder if I've sold our house's interests to the Starks." Sansa slipped out of bed, pulling a robe around herself. She spoke without looking at him as she crossed to the small mirror near the wall. "I'm not naive enough to think a wedding ceremony erases old wounds. My father always told me that the North remembers. But perhaps we can build something new out of the wreckage." Tyrion rose as well, smoothing the wrinkles from his tunic. "I would like nothing more," he said quietly. Then, with a wry half-smile, he added, "I hope you're prepared for the flood of well-wishers and gawkers who will no doubt accost us today." Sansa let out a breath, her gaze flicking to him in the mirror. "I am. But if they expect me to hide in my solar and cower, they're mistaken. Let them talk. I intend to show them that I trust my husband and that he has a place here in Winterfell no matter what rumors might stir." He inclined his head, a soft gratitude stirring in his chest. "Then let them come," he said. "We'll face them together." With that, he bowed in a courteous gesture which made Sansa huff a small laugh. Then he moved to collect his cloak, shifting his weight to accommodate his shorter stature on the stone floor. "Shall we go find breakfast? I suspect the great hall still smells of feasting, but I'd kill for a cup of hot tea or cider." She nodded. "Lead the way, my lord," she said, a faint twinkle in her eye. They emerged from the room, stepping into the corridor. A pair of guards stationed nearby glanced at them. One of the guards was a northerner, the other an unsullied soldier assigned to help maintain peace in the castle. That small moment, a Stark guard and an unsullied standing side by side, represented the uncharted future forging under Winterfell's roof. Tyrion gave them both a polite nod, and the two made their way through the winding corridors that led toward the Great Hall. Meanwhile, Daenerys and Jon were already there, standing beside a long table as servants cleared away the last vestiges of the previous night's revelry. Platters of half-eaten bread, jugs of stale ale, and the remains of what might have been a roast boar lay scattered across the wooden surface. A cook emerged from the kitchen with a steaming kettle of tea, which Daenerys accepted gratefully. When Tyrion and Sansa appeared, Jon greeted them with a welcoming nod, his expression carefully neutral but warm. "Good morning," Sansa said in a tone both civil and calm. "I trust you both slept well?" Daenerys quirked an eyebrow, her lips curving slightly. "As well as one can in the north during a snowstorm." She shot Jon a meaningful look that caused him to clear his throat. Tyrion, noticing this exchange, took the opportunity to divert attention. "Shall we have breakfast before the onslaught of visitors begins? I suspect the lords of the north and all the rest who attended the wedding will want an audience of some sort. Or perhaps a thorough airing of all the gossip." He paused to accept a cup from a servant who hovered nearby. The tea was pungent with spices, steam curling upward. Sansa inclined her head and took a seat. "Yes. And I'm sure they'll want to discuss next steps. Our alliances, the question of who rules what, and how the North will coexist with a Targaryen queen." She looked at Jon. "We've avoided the subject in detail, but we should address it soon. Will you and Daenerys stay here in Winterfell for the foreseeable future, or do you intend to move south to claim the Iron Throne?" Daenerys folded her hands around the teacup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "I've been thinking about that," she admitted. "For so long, my dream was to sit upon the Iron Throne. But after the battles we've endured, I see that ruling is more than just conquering. I'd like to remain in the north until we're sure the realm is stable, help rebuild what was lost. But eventually, yes, I must go to King's Landing. The capital can't be left leaderless forever." Jon nodded in agreement, though his expression looked guarded. "I know the north has yearned for independence. My father died believing the Seven Kingdoms were a noose around our neck. But times have changed. The only way to ensure peace might be a unified realm, the one that respects the North's traditions." Sansa gave him a long, measured look. "That will be up to the Northerners to decide," she said, tone careful. "But I believe we can find common ground. We're already forging alliances no one ever expected." At that, Tyrion gently set his cup down. "Speaking of unexpected alliances, I'd like to propose that we reach out to the lords of the Westerlands. My family name carries weight there, even if they despise me personally. And someone needs to ensure that the Lannister lands don't devolve into chaos. Your sister, well, she left a power vacuum when she lost the war. There are many questions about who truly leads the Westerlands now." Daenerys felt a surge of old pain at the mention of Cersei. The woman's final stands, the betrayals, the refusal to honor alliances in the face of the undead threat had led to her downfall. Though the official story was that she perished after the White Walkers were defeated, rumors swirled that she'd been captured and quietly dealt with in the aftermath. Many in the realm preferred not to speak of it openly. Either way, the result was the same. House Lannister's seat, Casterly Rock, was left uncertain. Tyrion was the last son of Tywin Lannister, but he had been disowned and hunted by the crown back when Cersei still reigned in King's Landing. Now, after all that transpired, some might accept him as rightful lord, others would balk. Daenerys studied Tyrion's face. She saw concern, but also a determination. If he did not step up, the Westerlands might descend into squabbling under minor lords. That could create instability that threatened all of Westeros. "We can discuss the best approach," Daenerys said evenly. "But I do believe you should assert your claim, at least nominally, if only to keep order. If we are to have a realm at peace, each region must have strong leadership, people they trust to speak for them." Tyrion nodded, his gaze flicking to Sansa. "Agreed. Though I find it rather ironic that I, once the despised imp, and now the last viable heir. But so be it." Sansa's expression softened slightly. "You have the mind for it. And if you succeed in uniting the Westerlands behind us, it will go a long way to calming any fears about Targaryen rule." Jon, finishing his tea, set the cup aside and rose. "Let's not delay. The sooner we speak with the assembled lords, the better. Word of the wedding is already spreading like wildfire. We need to ensure everyone understands the shape of things to come and that the decisions made here are for the benefit of all." Daenerys, too, stood. Then let's gather them in the Great Hall when the bells ring for midday. That should give time for the lords and their retinues to prepare themselves. Some are likely still sleeping off last night's wine. By then, we'll be ready to outline our next steps." Sansa smoothed a crease in her gown, then linked her hands. "I'll inform our stewards to make the hall presentable. Lady Brienne can help corral anyone who might be reluctant or slow. And Arya," she paused, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Arya will make her presence known if she thinks someone needs encouragement." Tyrion suppressed a grin, recalling the slight, deadly figure of Arya Stark and how she had once threatened to carve off his face if he wronged Sansa. He was glad to be on her good side, or at least, not on her bad side. They dispersed, each with tasks to attend. Outside, the snow continued to fall gently, flecking the walls of Winterfell in a pristine, swirling coat. Servants bustled, clearing debris from the courtyard. Several Dothraki, guided by unsullied officers who had become their reluctant translators, stood near the stables, tending to the horses. The presence of foreign warriors in the north still caused some friction, but months of shared battle experience had eased tensions. Men who had once eyed each other with suspicion now exchanged nods of recognition. The scars of the Great War against the dead remained, but new bonds had formed in that forge of terror. As Jon walked toward the keep's offices, Ghost padding silently beside him, he encountered Samwell Tarly stepping out from a side corridor, arms laden with scrolls. Sam grinned when he saw Jon, nearly dropping his bundle. "I was just coming to find you," he said. "I heard you'd be meeting with the lords soon. I have some documents, mostly reports from the Citadel, though they're incomplete, that might help us gauge how the rest of the realm is responding to the news of your marriage." Jon offered a faint smile in return. "Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. I can't pretend to be an expert in the art of ruling. I'll need all the help I can get." They began walking together, Ghost trotting along. Sam adjusted the scrolls in his arms. "I've also been reviewing the genealogical records again, everything that led us to discover your parentage. Now that you and Daenerys are married, your claim is, well, let's just say it's complicated." Jon's jaw tightened. He recalled how the revelation of his lineage had shaken him to the core. For a brief time, it had driven a wedge between him and Daenerys, since it meant he had a technically stronger claim to the throne than she did. But they had chosen unity over contention, letting love guide them. "I don't want to press any claim," Jon said, voice firm. "Let the realm think of me as Jon Snow, the man who fought for the North. She's the queen." Sam nodded sympathetically. "I know. But the moment word spreads of your parentage, some lords might push for you to assume the throne, especially in the North. They might see you as a more suitable option than a Targaryen queen from across the sea. It's not what we want, but we must be prepared." Jon exhaled a cloud of white breath. "Then we'll handle it when it comes. For now, let's focus on what we can control." They passed into the keep's administrative wing, a modest series of chambers where old ledgers and records were kept. A fire crackled in the hearth, warding off the chill. There, Jon met with a half-dozen stewards and scribes, instructing them to prepare for the midday gathering. He also requested that Ser Davos, Tormund, and a few other trusted men be summoned to help keep the peace if tempers flared. Tensions were lower than they had been during the war, but one never knew how quickly old grudges could ignite. Elsewhere, Daenerys made her way toward the courtyard to check on her people. Missandei joined her, cloaked in a heavy fur she still found cumbersome compared to the thin dresses of her native Noth. Grey Worm was also nearby, speaking with a small group of Unsullied. The sight of him reminded Daenerys of how the Unsullied had followed her across an ocean, through battle against the dead, and now found themselves in a land of constant snow. She still felt responsible for their well-being, for their future. She approached Grey Worm, who straightened respectfully. "Any news?" she asked. He shook his head. "No threats, no incidents last night. Some small disputes over food or drunken behavior, but nothing serious. The men are adjusting. Many have asked if we will remain here, or if we will go south soon." Daenerys sighed softly. "They've served me without question. The least I owe them is some clarity about their future. If we stay in the north for the next few moons, I'll ensure the supplies are sufficient and that they're housed comfortably. But I'll make it clear that eventually we will move south to King's Landing. They're free men, though. If any prefer to settle elsewhere, I won't stop them." Grey Worm nodded. "I will speak with them. They remain loyal." Daenerys gave him a small, grateful smile, then turned to look at the snow piling around the courtyard. She remembered the scorching sun of Essos, the cracking desert floor, the mosaic streets of Meereen. It felt like a dream now. Everything had changed since then. She continued on, passing a group of Dothraki who were grooming their horses beneath an awning. They, too, had braved the wintry climate in her service. Some had begun to adapt. layering themselves with furs and thick leathers. They still looked at her with reverence. She was the rider of dragons, the one who had proven her strength beyond the narrow sea. She offered them a respectful nod, and they bowed in return, calling her Khaleesi under their breath. The words stirred old memories in her heart, memories of Khal Drogo, of a life lost and transformed so many times over. Missandei gently touched Daenerys' arm. "You've carried so much responsibility for so long. Perhaps today we can take a moment of rest before the gathering." Daenerys shook her head with a slight smile. "I wish I could, but as queen, I must show my face, especially after the wedding. And as I'm a foreign queen, at least in the eyes of many northerners, I need to demonstrate that I respect their land, their customs. It's a delicate balance." They made their way back inside, ascending a flight of stairs to a gallery that overlooked the Great Hall. From there, Daenerys saw the servants already at work, rearranging tables, laying fresh rushes on the floor, and lighting more torches to push back the gloom. Her thoughts drifted to the meeting to come. Would the Northern Lords press for independence again? Would they see her marriage to Jon as mere politics, or as genuine love? And what would it mean for her rule if whispers spread about Jon's true parentage? She recalled how he had reacted when Sam told him. He had been dismayed. He never sought a crown, never wanted to overshadow her, but she had seen the look in his eyes. He was a man of duty, shaped by Ned Stark's sense of honor, and the knowledge of his Targaryen blood had torn at him. She wondered if, at some point, that revelation might surface among the lords and create a rift. Yet she also trusted Jon's word. He was not one to break faith lightly, especially not in matters of love. At midday, the bells sounded. Lords, knights, dignitaries, and their retinues began to filter into the great hall. The hush of shifting cloaks and soft murmurs filled the air. On a raised platform stood 4 chairs, though usually Winterfell only needed one for the ruling Stark. Accommodations had been made for both the king and queen and for Lord Tyrion and Lady Sansa as the realm's newest power couple. Sansa took her seat with cool grace, wearing a gown of dark blue that accentuated her fiery hair. Tyrion positioned himself at her side, hands clasped, expression composed. Jon arrived next, quietly taking his place, with Daenerys soon following, her silver hair braided back, wearing a cloak pinned with the 3-headed dragon sigil. There was no ring of steel behind them in the form of a king's guard or queen's guard. Rather, the North's guardians and Daenerys' protectors stood intermingled, forming a subtle perimeter. Grey Worm and Ser Davos exchanged respectful nods from opposite sides. Sansa rose first, letting her gaze sweep the assembled. The majority were northern lords, but among them stood envoys from the Vale, the Riverlands, and a few from the Stormlands. Several tall, broad-shouldered men in the front row wore cloaks of thick brown or gray, signifying them as heads of smaller houses that had pledged fealty to House Stark for generations. Their faces were a tapestry of curiosity, caution, and grudging respect. Lords and ladies of the North and honored guests from beyond, Sansa began, her voice carrying with a steadiness that would have shocked her younger self. "We thank you for attending the wedding ceremonies. Today we stand before you joined in new bonds. House Stark and House Targaryen have forged a union in the persons of Jon Snow and Daenerys Stormborn in the same spirit that I, Sansa of House Stark, have wed Tyrion of House Lannister. We know this raises questions. We will strive to answer them." She stepped back, and Tyrion took a slight step forward, hands clasped. "I understand that many of you have reservations about the Lannister name. Believe me, I share some of those reservations given how my father and sister ruled. Yet I stand here not to declare old loyalties or old hostilities, but to propose a future of cooperation. The war against the dead proved that together we can overcome threats greater than ourselves. My hope is that in the aftermath we can maintain that unity. We are here to listen to your concerns and find a path forward." He nodded to Jon, who rose. The king in the north, though that title was complicated now, studied the crowd. "You all know me," he said simply. "Some of you grew up with me here in Winterfell. Others fought beside me at the Battle of the Bastards or in the Great War against the Night King. I've bled for the North, and I will continue to protect it come what may. My marriage to Daenerys Targaryen does not change that. If anything, it strengthens our defenses. But I won't pretend that everything is settled. We have more work to do. The realm needs a stable leadership if we are to rebuild and heal." Then Daenerys stepped forward, chin high, voice ringing with a quiet confidence. I have been called many things. Usurper, liberator, conqueror, savior. I prefer none of these titles. I only wish to rule justly and bring peace. I fought alongside you to save the North from the dead. My dragons bled for you as your armies bled for me. It is my hope that you will come to see me as an ally, a sister in arms. Together, we can ensure the North remains strong and that no further horror can threaten this land. If you have doubts, speak them. We will not shy away. A low murmur swept through the crowd. Eventually, a tall lord with a thick gray beard and a heavy cloak stepped forward. He was Lord Glover, who had once expressed strong reservations about bending the knee to Daenerys. He cleared his throat. Your Grace, he said, addressing Daenerys, my family has fought for the Starks for generations. We remember well how your father, he paused, swallowing, the Mad King, harmed this realm. Many in the North have not forgotten those scars. But we also saw your dragons burn the undead on our very doorstep. We saw you lead men into battle at Winterfell's gates. I speak for House Glover when I say we have questions, but we will not deny the debt we owe you. Daenerys inclined her head solemnly. I understand, and I don't take your concerns lightly. My father was indeed a terrible king. He hurt many families, including mine, in his madness. But I am not him. If you give me the chance, I will prove that my reign does not mirror his. Lord Glover nodded, stepping back. Another spoke, then another, lords from various corners of the North, each voicing a concern, the presence of Unsullied in their lands, the lingering Dothraki camps, the question of whether the North would be forced to supply a southern war. Jon, Sansa, and Daenerys took turns addressing these concerns, emphasizing that the war was over, that no forced levies would be demanded beyond normal feudal obligations, and that the foreign troops would depart with the Queen once matters were settled and the weather permitted safe travel south. Tyrion listened carefully, interjecting now and then with a diplomatic turn of phrase that soothed tensions. Bit by bit, the atmosphere shifted from accusatory to cautiously cooperative. Jon felt a measure of relief. He was not gifted in political maneuvering, but he recognized good progress when he saw it. Then a question arose from Lord Royce of the Vale, a burly man wearing the sigil of House Royce runes etched into his breastplate. What of King's Landing? He asked bluntly. The city was devastated by the war, last I heard. Has any progress been made in restoring order there? A ripple of murmurs passed through the hall. People remembered the chaos that had followed after the confrontation with Cersei. The capital had become a tinderbox of riots, famine, and uncertain leadership. Some said a council of local nobility tried to keep the peace, but it was precarious. Daenerys took a step forward. I have not returned to King's Landing since we marched north to face the undead. My hand, Tyrion, kept in contact with certain allies there. But with the war ended, it is time we restore proper governance. When spring truly arrives and travel is less treacherous, I will ride south to claim the throne. In the meantime, we will send envoys to ensure the city has supplies and that no warlords take advantage of the power vacuum. She paused, scanning the hall. I will not force the North to bend unwillingly. But I hope you will stand with me in forging a realm guided by justice, not tyranny. The wheel must be broken. That was my vow long before I came here. More questions followed, some about trade, about border security, about the possible threat of Ironborn raids. Bit by bit, the discussion took on the shape of a working council. As the sun climbed higher, the air in the hall grew warmer from the torches and the tension began to thaw. Eventually, they agreed to a broad set of next steps. An envoy of trusted northern lords, accompanied by an unsullied contingent, would travel to King's Landing to assess the situation before Daenerys herself journeyed south. Tyrion would write to the Westerlands, informing them of his position and inviting them to negotiate a peaceful transition of power under House Lannister's rightful heir himself, albeit with the Queen's backing. Meanwhile, Sansa would remain in Winterfell as Lady of the North, with Jon staying by her side until Daenerys was ready to depart. It was not the final word on anything, but it was a framework. By the time the midday gathering ended, people began to file out, conversing in low tones. Some were still uncertain, but no one had openly challenged Daenerys' right to rule. That alone felt like a small victory. Jon exchanged a look of relief with Sansa, who inclined her head as if to say, yes, for now, the peace holds. However, as the hall emptied, a single figure lingered at the back, someone wearing a nondescript cloak, hood pulled low. Jon's eyes narrowed, trying to see who it was. Then the figure stepped forward, drawing back the hood. It was Lord Varys. He had arrived unnoticed by most, blending into the crowd with his practiced subtlety. Tyrion stiffened slightly at the sight of him, for the spider's presence often portended sudden shifts in fate. Lord Varys, Daenerys said evenly, though her tone carried a note of wariness. I didn't expect you here so soon. I was told you had gone south to gather information. Varys smiled that practiced, ambiguous smile of his, hands folded in front of him. I did, your grace. But I found reason to return. Word of your union to the king in the north is traveling quickly, and I wanted to see the state of things for myself. I must say, Winterfell is quite warm today, metaphorically speaking. Tyrion's mouth tightened. And what brings you to our meeting at precisely this moment, my lord? Surely you have more to tell us than pleasantries. Varys inclined his bald head, his expression carefully neutral. I come bearing news that could not wait. The Iron Islands are stirring. Yara Greyjoy has reclaimed much of her territory and appears to be consolidating her fleet. She may harbor ambitions of full independence now that the wars have subsided. Could be a minor concern, or it could escalate. Additionally, scattered Sellsword companies roam the Stormlands, possibly remnants of Euron's former alliances. They harass villages and caravans. The people cry out for stability. Jon and Daenerys exchanged a glance. Both knew that ignoring these issues could allow them to fester. And King's Landing? Daenerys pressed, crossing her arms. Varys shrugged lightly. King's Landing is holding on for the moment. There's a council of lesser nobles who, believe it or not, are attempting to keep the peace. However, gold is running short. The city relies on trade. Without stable leadership or coin, a collapse could come swiftly. Daenerys exhaled. So if we wait until spring to go south, we risk allowing further chaos to spread. Sansa, hearing this, stepped closer. But you cannot ride south in the dead of winter. Even if the snows are lighter this year than some, the roads remain treacherous. The entire host would risk starvation and exposure. Varys lifted one slender hand. Hence the delicate dilemma. Go too soon and you gamble with the weather. Wait too long and chaos takes root. You'll need a deft approach. Silence stretched. Tyrion rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of it all. We're just beginning to unify the north. If Daenerys leaves too suddenly, it might look like she abandons her alliance. But if she stays, we might lose King's Landing to anarchy. He looked up, meeting Daenerys's gaze. Your Grace, we must decide carefully. Daenerys's eyes flicked to Jon, to Sansa, to Tyrion, all waiting for her word. She squared her shoulders. We'll do what we must to maintain stability on both fronts. I propose we form a smaller expedition that will go south ahead of the main host. They'll assess the situation in King's Landing, stabilize what they can, and ensure supplies are routed north so that when I do travel, we can handle the elements. Tyrion, you will lead this expedition, given your familiarity with the capital and your skill in negotiation. Take who you need. Coordinate with Yara Greyjoy if you can. Perhaps we can negotiate an alliance for her to guard the seas in exchange for recognition of some measure of autonomy. Tyrion inclined his head, though he swallowed hard at the magnitude of the task. As you wish. I will do my utmost. Jon shifted his weight. I'll remain in Winterfell, then, to assist Sansa. The realm needs to see that the north stands strong with the queen. If trouble brews, we can send reinforcements south once the roads are safer. Daenerys nodded. Very well. Then we have a plan, imperfect though it may be. Her gaze cut to Varys. Will you accompany Tyrion? Your network of little birds is invaluable, and he'll need your support. Varys gave a polite bow. Of course, your grace. I live to serve the realm. Sansa's expression was pensive, but she gave a small nod of agreement. This approach might work, though it's a gamble. If Tyrion can soothe the capital while the rest of us secure the north, we may buy enough time to restore order when you finally arrive in King's Landing in the spring. The conversation continued in lower tones for a while, hammering out details. Grey Worm might send a detachment of Unsullied to escort Tyrion, alongside a handful of northern knights who wished to see the capital. Sansa would remain Lady of Winterfell, hosting Daenerys and ensuring the north cooperated with any trade caravans or political envoys. Once the roads were more navigable, Daenerys would lead the remainder of her forces south, hopefully to a city that had not collapsed in the interim. It was a patchwork solution, but sometimes that was all a realm had in the aftermath of war. When at last they parted ways, Daenerys lingered, gazing out a narrow window that overlooked Winterfell's courtyard. Snow was drifting in slow spirals, coating the stones below. A part of her wanted to ride south immediately on Drogon, to seize the city and set it in order herself. But she knew that approach could breed more resentment, and there was the matter of the weather, which was no small barrier even for dragons. Perhaps diplomacy was the wiser path, as Tyrion always insisted. Behind her, Jon approached, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She leaned back slightly, closing her eyes. For a moment, the burdens of queenship receded, replaced by the simple solace of his presence. They stood there, side by side, rulers in a newly joined realm, uncertain but determined. And so the next chapter of their reign began. Not with a grand parade or a bloody conquest, but with the careful steps of negotiation, compromise, and shared responsibility. In the silent hush of swirling snow, the seeds of a new order were being sown.